Are you prepared to hear the most lukewarm take in all of Warhammer? Centurions look kinda goofy. I know, I said it, try to keep the comments civil. But okay, now that we got that out of the way, how do we actually go about fixing these guys? Because while I'm usually a fan of jetpacks and chainswords, as a Blood Angels player, big chunky armor is yet another one of my aesthetic tastes. So welcome to Gone Hollow Minis, my name is Colt, and today we're finally giving these three Centurions the glow up that they deserve. Okay, so we all know that Centurions are a little goofy, but before we get to hacking away at our models, let's try to figure out why that is. The first thing that hits me, at least, is the stature. These guys were in the last wave of Firstborn Marines before the Primaris came and embiggened everything, so these guys are a little bit on the shorter side of what they could be, at least compared to Primaris. A related problem is the proportions. Woo boy, these guys are built, different. First off, the legs are way too stocky, and not in the good chunky way. The armor plates really don't help this either, but how short and wide they are really makes it look like they're wearing trash cans on their legs. And on those armor plates, they're just a little boring. The thigh and shin sections are basically fused together as one big piece. There's nothing here to break up the silhouette, nothing to really make this thing feel mobile. You can't see the joint detailing on the knee, so it really just feels like these guys can't walk. Moving up now, I actually think the torsos are pretty good. Big, bulky, and boxy in just about the right amounts. Good enough for me. But now on to the weapons. I'm most interested in the Assault variant, being a Blood Angels player, so I'm going to focus in on those. The drills are just not doing it for me. I usually like the idea of big chunky siege drills, but these are just a little oddly proportioned for my tastes. I think the heads of the drills are just a little bit too wide compared to the rest of the underslung weapon. Plus, I'm not totally sure how these are supposed to work. I mean, these guys are supposed to be big anti-vehicle threats, and who's going to sit their tank there long enough for you to slowly drill through the hole? But hey, that's something that's easy enough to fix. The last problem though is the head, mainly how he looks like he's currently being swallowed by his armor. Maybe we're stretching the proportions of even the Primaris Marines here, but I really feel like the head needs to be a decent bit higher to actually contribute to the overall design and silhouette. But anyway, now we've got our to-do list. Longer legs, better weapons, and an actual neck. Admittedly, that last one isn't something that Space Marines are overly known for, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's start with the legs. This will absolutely be the most intensive part of this kit bash. Our supplies are as follows. The Centurion spruce, obviously. I've also got a sprue of Cataphracti Terminator bits. These are just for the lightning claws, so no worries if you don't have one of these. We'll of course need a ton of tools between the usual clippers, an X-Acto knife, some sanding sticks, and importantly a hobby saw. Like really, if you try this for yourself, please do yourself a favor and go get a hobby saw. It makes everything so much easier and cleaner. We'll also need some replacement legs. These spares I had were left over from the Reaver kit, but any Phobos legs should work as long as they're spread a bit, with feet flat to the ground. Infiltrators work even better. We'll also need some styrene rod. This is the stuff that I had on hand, and it seemed to be about the right diameter for what we'll be using it for. And one last note on glue, because a few people have asked me questions about what adhesives I use. It's really nothing fancy. For finer work with solid, flat contact points, I use Tamiya extra thin plastic cement. This makes really strong, seamless bonds, but can be a little bit messy to work with. I also use super glue for joints that have a bit more of a gap to them. This is just regular cyanoacrylate glue from the hobby store. But now we're onto the kit bashing, and it's at this point that I need to mention that this idea was inspired by Praetor and Carmine over on Instagram, who converted his own Centurions a while back. To get started, clip out the leg pieces for the model you're building. These are the main thing that we'll have to replace, but unfortunately we can't just throw these ones out. You'll notice that the feet are attached to this little ball joint thing, and there's a big mechanical looking chunk on the knee. We'll need both of these pieces, but we can lose the rest. Just make sure to keep track of this little ball joint socket on the back too. Another piece will connect to this later, so as we start cutting, make sure to cut above that part. Let's start by separating all of these leg pieces. We need the knee and the feet parts, but the thighs and groin can disappear. I start this by just sawing through at the ankle. I'm leaving more material both above and below the cut than I'll actually need. We'll refine this in a bit with some nipping and sanding, so I start conservative to make sure that I don't accidentally cut too close. Once the rough foot piece is off, we can start by refining the shape. Using a pair of spare cutters that I don't mind using on chunkier cuts, I start by blocking in an angled cut, leaving the ball joint at the back but cutting pretty much to the little foot pad thing on the front. Then I sand it down to make sure it's all nice and flat. Now for the knees. These are the more annoying of the two. Start by trimming down the visible parts of the leg that remain. Remember, we need the mechanical looking knee detail, but we've already got another pair of legs in mind. Again, using clippers I don't mind messing up a bit. I'm going to start by carving away at the leg sculpting. Then, once I've gotten a decent chunk of it removed, I switch to the X-Acto knife to refine the shape. We're going for a concave inner geometry here. We'll be settling this over the knee of our Phobos leg, so we want it to fit well. Just keep carving, sanding, and clipping until you have a nice inner curve to fit on your Phobos legs. It should look something like this in the end. With that part carved out, we get to do this all over again on the other side. Alrighty, now we can start on our first little bit of assembly. Start by placing your Phobos feet onto the little foot plates that we just carved out from our firstborn legs. Line up the back of the plate with the heel on the Phobos armor. There will be some overhang at the front, so make sure to trim that down too. This will butt up right against the inside of the armor plate, so no one will see it, I promise. Now for the feet. You'll notice the ball joints have these little keys in them. We've changed the geometry on the pose quite a bit with these new legs, so we'll have to carve those out. After we do that, dab a little super glue in and set your legs into the sockets. Make sure to watch the angle that your Marine is standing at so he doesn't end up leaning. Using a flat surface for the feet will make sure that he'll be standing nice and flat on his base, which is always a plus. Now for the armor panels. First thing here is to separate them, they're just way too short as is. Luckily, this can be easily done with an X-Acto knife, just as always be careful. The shin parts connect right onto the front toe bit, so those should be easy to manage. You might have to sand down the Phobos foot a little bit more, but keep making small changes and double checking as you go and it should be okay. Also keep in mind that we're attaching the joint section straight onto the Phobos legs, but that they'll still have to kinda connect with the armor plates. Make sure that you have enough room for these segments to fit naturally in the slot on the shin armor. Adjust the pose as necessary and glue these parts on. Next is the knee joint, which is just attached with a bit of super glue. Remember to slot this right into the cutout on the shin plate. The top part could look a little ugly, but that's okay, because we're going to go right in and cover it with the thigh armor. Now we've got to move on to a slightly more complicated part. Centurions have little piston tube bits running along the sides of their legs. Because we've put so much work into making these guys not baby-sized, the stock parts just won't fit anymore. So we're going to have to make our own. I'm going to start from the bottom up. Clip off the little connection parts away from the full part, making sure to have a nice flat face, and attach this as normal. Then trim the rest of the showing piston from the middle section and glue that on too. Try to line them up so that there's as straight of a line as possible between the ankle connector and this knee connector. Now comes the styrene rod. I measure this by holding it up to the gap that it needs to fit in, then trimming a little bit longer than I need. I can then sand and trim it down until it fits nice and snug into the gap. And voila, leg piston problem solved. You're going to have to repeat this once more on this side and of course reflect it onto the other leg, but the process is all pretty much the same, so it shouldn't be too tricky. Now the angles on these tubes might not line up 100%, or they may even be at angles that wouldn't realistically work for pistons in the real world, but trust me, no one's going to notice. They're going to be too busy marveling at the fact that you made Centurions not look like knockoff Transformer action figures from the dollar store. Once those are done, we get a tiny break to assemble a few parts as normal. Like we mentioned, the chest is pretty solidly designed, and I don't really feel like any changes are necessary, so keep working on that until we get to the arms. Now we're moving on into the weapons here, and it's worth noting that this is pretty much just my aesthetic choice. If you like the siege drills, go for it. You don't need to follow any of these, and you can just build them as normal. But that said, I'm a Blood Angels player, and siege drills aren't really our thing, so I'm going to do what any good son of Sanguinius would do, and steal from the Carcharodons! Obviously. Tyberos the Red Wake has these gnarly, super over-engineered, absolutely overcomplicated lightning claw chain fist things named Hunger and Slake. That's rad as hell, so I'm gonna try and recreate those on my Centurions. Let's start with the lightning claws. These are from the Cataphracti Terminators kit, and I found that these work really well. But the same general idea should work with whichever ones you have lying around. Just make sure they're Terminator sized. I'm gonna start by cutting off all of the lightning claw fingertips. We'll use all 5 here, so make sure not to lose the thumb. The other 4 will be removed by sawing into the upper palm part of the power fist. Again, make sure to give yourself more material than necessary here. We can refine it with more careful tools in a little bit. Now to remove the fingers on our Centurions. I went ahead and attached the finger portions so that the fist was entirely built. Then I used nippers, sandpaper, and sanding sticks to remove the big power mittens those guys have. This can be a little messy, but a lot of the poses end up palm down anyway, so the most unsightly portions should be pretty well hidden. Once we have a nice flat stump on our fist and a flat connection at the knuckles of our lightning claws, we can use just a little bit of super glue to attach them together. Just don't forget the thumb. But now for the chain fists, because massive power claws wasn't enough. To keep things suitably ridiculous, I'm going to use whole chain swords for this. Like I said, I'm a Blood Angels player, so I've got a fair share of these lying around. Start by cutting them off at the hilt, right by the little motor section. Then line them up with how they're going to fit together and flatten out the necessary sides of each. Sand them flat to make sure that they'll line up nice and even, and glue them together. To attach them to the fist, you'll also need to flatten the top, so go ahead and do that too. On the arm, we'll need to flatten down the weapon mount point here as well. Once that's done, we can attach our chain swords by butting them up against this little servo arm thing. For one last touch, I'm going to attach these melta weapons. This might be a little bit too much, but honestly, if I don't model them onto these guys, I'd probably forget they were there while I'm playing on the tabletop. Now for the last problem part, the head. This is a really easy fix. I just picked a slightly larger head, a Grey Knight Paladin head in this case, and mixed up a bit of green stuff. Smush the green stuff into the neck joint, then press your head in until it sits at just the right height, no longer being swallowed by his own armor. And with that, we're just about done. There's a ton more room for detail here to really tailor these guys to your individual chapter. With how big and chunky they are, especially after our conversion work, they'll really stand out on the tabletop, so have fun customizing them for your own heraldry. But this guy was the last one in the squad that I needed to kitbash, so let's go ahead and get a layer of primer on these things and a quick zenithal to show off some of the detail. Thank you all so much for watching this kitbashing tutorial. A lot of people seem to enjoy how these guys came out, so I hope you were able to follow along. As always, feel free to drop any questions in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer. Subscribe to not miss the next conversion, like if this helped you with your own Space Marine in a Space Marine project, and until next time friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.